Maurice Wallace, what are we looking at?
We are seeing the image of Frederick Douglass, a young Frederick Douglass, that very well-known 19th century abolitionist, orator, very famous for his 1845 autobiography, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, which has come to be one of the most formative and important 19th century African American narratives of slavery and freedom in the United States. This image is particularly important because Douglass himself gave a series of lectures that reflected on the meaning of photography at its earliest moments in our cultural history. And he himself was so fond of the new technology that he sat fairly regularly for portraits of himself over the course of his very long career. And this is one of those earlier portraits of a young, heroic, strong, hard-featured Frederick Douglass.
Why did he write an essay about photography, and when?
Well, he wrote 2 or 3 essays on photography right around the end of the Civil War. And he wrote these essays. They were, in fact, they were speeches at first that reflected his enthusiasm for this new technology that was far cheaper and therefore accessible to persons without means. They were swift in reproduction and many could be made. And he thought it had a great possibility for showing the nation what the freedmen and freedwomen could look like, help the nation in fact visualize free African Americans as an essential part of the country. And the visual technology and the cheapness of it made it a very, very useful and convenient device for representing the newest citizens of the United States.
And you write in the introduction to this book, photography was a watershed invention. So profound was the influence of photography upon antebellum and postbellum American life and thought that, like today's digital technology, early photography shifted the very ground upon which the production and circulation of knowledges, scientific and philosophical, had set only a half century earlier.
Mm-hmm. Which is to say that photography made vision a subject itself. It allowed us to see what we thought we knew and to interrogate what we imagined we'd known. And there was a way in which photography lent itself to a prior developing understanding that what was visible was in fact true, was in fact real. And so it helped to not only reflect the ways in which Americans saw the world, but also helped to shape the way Americans would continue to see the world. And was a really important technological change in the 19th century for the world, frankly. But photography sort of took off in the United States in ways that far surpassed any other place in the world.
Subtitle of your book, Early Photography and the Making of African American Identity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What's the uniqueness of the African American experience with photography?
Well, emancipation and the development of photographic technology converge at around the time of the Civil War. So it's not to say, of course, that photography was not a vital form for the entire nation. And in fact, it was most popular among Civil War soldiers, black and white, who were particularly interested in having representations, images of themselves sent home to loved ones. But the idea that the emancipation of former slaves would happen at about the time that photographic technology was really taking off, meant for a convergence of cultural forms and politics and history that would permit African Americans and the rest of the nation, frankly, to imagine, as I said previously, what the present and the future of black life could be in the United States. Now, photography in the earliest parts of that convergence, I think, served African American aspirations. African Americans themselves took images in order to represent themselves in the most respectable and often the most bourgeois ways conceivable, in a way that was altogether unthreatening to those who might fear what emancipation would look like. It seemed to represent a fair interest in a democratic assimilation into the body politic. Later on, however, photography had a much more nefarious effect on black cultural life, as certain persons would make something of a trend out of things as unimaginable as lynching photographs, so that as African Americans were hung and mutilated, there were mobs of racist Americans who not only captured those moments on in photographs, but circulated those photographs. And some of that circulation happened, in fact, through the U.S. Postal Services, sadly, but it was a thing that showed both the ways in which African Americans utilized photography to good aspirational ends, and in ways in which they were often the objects of others' misuse of photography and the dangers that it could conceivably pose.
Who was J.P. Ball?
So J.P. Ball was one of several prominent African American photographers. We hear a lot about of African Americans as the subjects of photographs. Probably not enough, but we hear a good amount. And thanks to so many of the contributors of the volume that you have in hand, we get the opportunity to learn about the ways in which African Americans as subjects negotiated the camera. But we know very little about those persons who themselves were professional operators, as they would have been called in the 19th century, professional photographers. J.P. Ball was one of the more successful African American photographers from the 19th century. A good deal of his subjects and subject matter took place out west, Midwest and out west, which also helped the nation imagine what a westward expansion would look like that included African Americans in it. But J.P. Ball was one of the very earliest and most important professional African American photographers in our country.
Maurice Wallace, where did this book come from?
This book came from a shared fascination with early photography between myself and my co-editor, Sean Michelle Smith, who is a faculty member at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. We had together participated on at least a couple of academic panels. I had long been a fan, as it were, of her work. She has written quite widely on African Americans and photography in the 19th and 20th centuries. And we determined that there was enough really interesting, provocative work being undertaken independently by scholars we knew and some we didn't know but had come into contact with their work, that we wanted to assemble a collection of this work just to give